Hi there, this is Dr. Paul Firnhaber. It's Wednesday and time for another 10 minutes of truth. So today I have an article out of the British Medical Journal, one of the top 4 journals in the world. The name of the article is Social, Clinical, and Policy Implications of Ultra-Processed Food Addiction. This is October of last year, 2023. So it's a fairly recent article. It starts out by saying ultra-processed foods are the major source of refined carbohydrates and added fats in our diet. The Yale Food Addiction Scale assesses all 11 symptom criteria for substance use disorder, including diminished control over intake, cravings, withdrawal, and continued use despite negative consequences. So this scale is used for like drug and alcohol addiction as well. And a substance use disorder is defined as the presence of 2 or more symptoms in the past year and clinically significant impairment or distress. So they looked at 2 systemic reviews involving 281 studies from 36 different countries and found out that the overall prevalence of food addiction using the Yale Food Addiction Scale was 14% in adults across the world, 12% in children. Now, to give you a little bit of context for this, if you look at alcohol addiction, it's 14%. It's the same for alcohol addiction. And for tobacco addiction is 18%. The prevalence of food addiction is 32% in people with obesity bariatric surgery, and over 50% of those with binge eating disorders. So when you have a food addiction, it's usually foods that are ultra processed and combine fats and carbohydrates together. And when you have this combination of refined carbohydrates, refined fats, that provokes a dopamine reaction in the brain, which causes addiction in the same way that alcohol and nicotine does. So foods that deliver high amounts of refined carbohydrate and fat together are pretty high candidates for addictive substances. Now, if we looked at natural or minimally processed foods, you do not see those 2 things together. So let's take an example. In an apple, you have, in 100 grams of an apple, you have 55 calories from complex carbohydrates and 1.5 calories from fat. So you have hardly anything from fat. So you're only getting the calories in complex carbohydrate. In salmon, in 100 grams, you have no calories from carbohydrate, and you have 73 calories from fat. So again, no carbohydrate, fat only. You don't see this combination. However, if you look at 100 grams of a chocolate bar, you have 237 calories from carbs and 266 calories from fat. It's about a 1-to-1 ratio. This combination of carbohydrates and fats seems to have a super addictive effect in the brain and reward systems above either macronutrient alone. So you don't get the same thing from just carbs, you don't get the same thing from just fat, but you put the 2 together and it becomes very, very addictive. The speed at which ultra-processed foods deliver carbohydrates and fats to the gut may also be an important to their addictive potential. For example, cigarettes deliver nicotine rapidly to the lungs through smoking, through inhaling. It's a very rapid process. When you when you eat ultra-processed foods, it hooks to certain binders in the gut, and it tends to up-regulate the amount of glucose and the rate of glucose absorption, which makes something very addictive and raises insulin levels. If you look at artificial sweeteners, also bind to receptors in the gut, increasing the capacity to absorb glucose. This is an explanation as to why those who regularly consume artificial sweeteners tend to gain weight, because those artificial sweeteners hook onto the receptors in the gut, causing rapid absorption of glucose. Well, this is something that's similar that happens when you have this carbohydrate and fat combination. Seems to affect the receptors in the gut differently and causes an upregulation in glucose absorption. Now, there's a couple of things that this article says that I think are very interesting. It talks about nuts, and nuts have a higher ratio of fat to carbohydrate than most ultra-processed foods. The thing is when you eat a nut, the fat remains encapsulated in the cell wall and does not get digested immediately. It's digested in the lower part of the GI tract. What happens is signaling from the lower part of the GI tract does not evoke dopamine in the brain, but signaling from the upper intestine does evoke dopamine, and that's why nuts tend to not be addictive in the same way that ultra-processed foods are addictive. So when you add additional flavors, what happens then is they're even more addictive. Just like adding menthol to a cigarette can make the cigarettes more addictive. So what is the point of this article? What is the what's the moral of the story, so to speak? The moral of the story is this: you need to avoid ultra-processed foods as much as possible. They're addictive, and they make you fat, and they affect brain function. So what are ultra-processed foods? Well, I don't need to tell you. Almost all your boxed breakfast cereals, your granola bars, all your chips, snacks, donuts, pastries, things like that are all ultra-processed. And they're all addictive, and they cause you to get fat, and they cause other problems in the body too. So the point of this article, and what I would like to say, is avoid it as much as possible. I can't say that most people eat some ultra-processed food at some point, but the less you eat, the better off you're going to be, the less weight you gain, and the better your brain's going to function. So that's all I have for today. Next Tuesday, we have a talk on chiropractic and science in my office. It's something I think you'll enjoy a lot, and I hope to see you there then. In the meantime, God bless you, and we'll see you Tuesday.